Today's episode is brought to you by Media for All, which was set up to help encourage more Black, Asian, and other ethnic talent into media, and to provide a support and mentoring network to ensure talent flourishes in the media industry that we all love. If you're looking for a mentor or would like to mentor young ethnic talent, check them out at mediaforall.org.uk, and it is all 100% free.
Hello and welcome to the Shiny New Object podcast. My name is Tom Ollerton. I'm the founder of Automated Creative, and this is a podcast about the future of marketing. Every week or so, I have the pleasure and the privilege of interviewing one of our industry's leaders, and this week is no different. I'm on a call with David Pugh, who is Marketing Director at MG Motor UK Ltd. David, for those of the audience who aren't familiar with who you are and what you do, can you give them an overview?
Yeah. So I'm currently the marketing director at MG Motor, as you said. My guilty secret is I'm not actually a marketeer at all. I'm an engineer. And I guess that will crop up in conversation as we go through this discussion today. And I got into marketing. I did an MBA and joined General Motors. And I'm a lifelong car geek, but I joined in the finance department, and after 5 years of basically badgering them to move to sales marketing, they finally said yes. And I did my first marketing role actually in Detroit. So I moved to Detroit and was an assistant brand manager and started to learn the ropes about how marketing works, specifically in the automotive industry, because I think it is a bit different. And I've been doing it ever since for the last 20 years at a number of brands that people will have heard of. And over the way, I've spent 20 years basically learning how little I know about marketing, and which is probably what brings us here today.
As far as I'm aware, you are our first engineer marketer. I'm curious to know how much of the engineer mindset or practices creep up in your work as a marketer.
Yeah, I think it influences it a lot, to be honest, but in ways sometimes that you might not expect. So the things you would expect, obviously, as an engineer, you're driven by numbers, you're analytical, and as I insist on telling everybody that's ever worked for me, marketing is a science at the end of the day. It is numerical, it is driven by numbers, and yes, creative matters, and there's that spark of inspiration. You can't measure that in numbers, but it is an analytical subject. So I approach everything from that point of view, but not just therefore numerically, but also analytically. I want to know how things work. And one of the things I've spent the last 20 years doing is trying to understand how marketing works. And I still don't know. But I've got a head full of theories and I tend to use them. So I guess I have a very rational approach, even to the things that I know are not rational. So when you're judging creative, for example, and you can't help but have a gut reaction, an emotional reaction when the first time you see a piece of creative or a creative idea, I'm still at the same time, I can feel part of my head trying to dismantle it and understand how does it work and how does this bit fit to that bit and what impact will that have on the person that sees it. So yeah, I guess I've got a nagging voice on my shoulder of the analytical part of me, although I know that obviously the rest of it is in there as well. So I guess yeah, you might say I'm almost conflicted for the last 20 years, but in a way that sometimes has been useful.
So, do you read marketing books? And if so, which ones do you recommend?
I do. And I quite often recommend books to people that work for me or I've worked with in the past. Well, the first author I pretty much always recommend is a guy called Bob Hoffman, who I came across in the States when I was working over there. He was back then he was writing a blog called Ad Contrarian, and he is a belligerent, grumpy old man of marketing. He's incredibly funny. He swears like a trooper, and his books are very digestible. They are really, really funny. He has a very acerbic point of view, but underneath all that, he is, and I guess, well, here comes the trend again, he is rigorously analytical, and he thinks through absolutely everything, and he's not afraid to call BS when he sees something that is BS. So as a man who learned years ago that I don't really know a lot about marketing, somebody who questions things, I guess, is always a natural place to go. I mean, the other place I tend to go, and not so much books, but all the, I mean, nowadays, so much content is online, and so many studies you can find. But I'm a disciple of Binet and Field, unapologetically, in terms of trying to measure marketing effectiveness and understand what makes advertising effective, and trying to find the secret sauce that you can put the pieces together for something that will work better than every other combination. So yeah, one almost for amusement and to challenge your own thinking, and then one for a rigorously analytical study of what works. And then from there on in, the world's your oyster.
Do you think you would ever write a marketing book?
God, no. No. I mean, genuinely, I often use the phrase with people when I'm working, every day is a school day, because quite genuinely, I understand I am not a marketing specialist. I'm a generalist. I got into this through a slightly peculiar route, and I love it, and I find it endlessly fascinating. But I would always be looking to learn from people smarter than me.
I'm just trying to think back to a previous interview on this podcast where someone has said, I love it. So I really want to talk to you a bit more about that. What do you love about marketing? Because you said that with real conviction, real truth. I'm just curious to know, what is it after all of these years that gets you excited in such an obvious way?
I think we are the luckiest people in the world working in this industry. If a job is just to earn money, if you want to do the thing that's going to pay you the most amount of money, then unless you're in a very, very, very tiny subset in all the marketing, that's not it. I mean, when I went to business school, my original plan was to be either a management consultant or an investment banker, and both those routes probably would have been more lucrative. Although I've been fortunate over the years, I've done okay, but I don't go to work just for the money. You spend a great many hours in the office, and so to me, if you're intellectually curious, you want something that's interesting, you want something that's fun, you want something that's going to engage you. And marketing, it is complex, it is technical, but it's about people. It's about how people think. It's about getting under their skin. And I don't think there is anything more fascinating than how human beings work, how they go about what they do. I remember when I have two kids, I have two daughters. And when my first daughter was born, the OB basically handed her over and said, "Welcome to the most interesting person you will ever meet." And I find, and it was that process of watching a child grow up and seeing how they think and seeing how they learn. There's an element of that in marketing, I think. We're constantly analyzing why we do what we do, what makes us do what we do. I mean, to do that in big chunks of your day as a job, when it's just so genuinely fascinating, and at the end of it, you get paid for it. I'm struggling to think, other than perhaps if I'd been a forward for Manchester United age 18 or something, I can't think what else I could have wished for that would have been more interesting, more fun, more fulfilling. And I've been lucky enough to work with so many really interesting, clever people over the years that I'm perhaps I need to broaden my horizons, but I genuinely can't think of what I could have done that would have given me a more broadly fulfilling work career than the one I've had. It's the best industry, I think, to work in if you're lucky enough to fit.
So, what has been the best investment of your own time, energy, and money in your career?
That would have to be going back to university and studying. So I as we said, I'm an engineer originally. I went back to business school. And as I said, originally that was because I was a little frustrated as an engineer. You realize quite quickly that you'll always be working for people that aren't engineers, because it's the accountants run the business. And as I said, my intention was to go off and be a management consultant or something. But that investment of 2 years out from my normal career, meeting some amazing people, some of the smartest people I've ever met, spending that time not only studying and expanding your professional horizons, but also learning about what other people do and what you're interested in. If it weren't for that, I would never have been able to make the switch into automotive and then into marketing. So that really was the one key that unlocked the route to what I do now. So it's a considerable investment in both time, energy, and money, both three. But absolutely worth it. And I've always said to people, if I've been working with people or friends or colleagues who are thinking about devoting time to study, I've always encouraged it, because I think, again, if you can expand yourself in terms of your own learning, your own capability, then not just for your future earning potential, but in terms of how much interest and enjoyment you're going to get out of your job, that's, to me, is always a good investment. So yeah, study and constant learning, I think, is one of my tips to everybody, and certainly the best investment in my career that I had made.
I really enjoy your humble stance on your own knowledge. I think if you scroll through LinkedIn, everyone who posts, including myself, gives off the impression, or at least the idea, that they are an expert and they do have all the answers. And it's very rare anyone sort of puts their hands up on a platform like that and says, "Well, I can't possibly understand everything." But I really like that. Every day's a school day. Constant state of learning. But I'm keen to know, what are those gems or singular bit of advice that you've heard in your career, or you've heard recently, that has stood out to you as a kind of top marketing tip, a kind of a silver bullet that someone could take away, like that you've noticed or heard recently?
Yeah, so I knew you were going to ask this question, and I had planned to sidestep it. And what I was going to say was that there is no one marketing tip. Again, that idea of constantly learning, and it's not false modesty on my part. I genuinely I don't consider myself an expert, and I was going to say that there isn't a single eureka moment to say that there is, a top tip. It just over emphasizes any one thing, but actually, just listening to you then made me rethink that slightly. I think there is one best tip that I've been given that, again, is probably part of what's allowed me to get where I've got. And it's not exactly a marketing tip, it's more of a management tip. But a guy used to be the chairman of Vauxhall in the UK, a guy called Bill Parfit, who was a very impressive leader and manager of people. He always said to me, surround yourself with good people. And I think if you are willing to accept that you don't know everything, and if you are willing to accept that you cannot be the expert on everything, then if you're going to be in a marketing leadership position as opposed to a subject matter specialist, and I have tended to be a generalist in my career, then the best thing you can do is exactly that. Surround yourself with good people. Find the people who you enjoy working with, who you share a mindset with, who clearly are brilliant at what they do. Give them a very clear direction in terms of what you are hoping you all collectively are going to try and achieve, and then get out of their way. That's my tip.
Fantastic. This episode of the Shiny New Object podcast is brought to you in partnership with MadFest. Whether it's live in London or streamed online to the global marketing community, you can always expect a distinctive and daring blend of fast-paced content, startup innovation pitches, and unconventional entertainment from MadFest events. You'll find me causing trouble on stage, recording live versions of this podcast, and sharing a beer with the nicest and most influential people in marketing. Check it out at www.madfestlondon.com. So we're at the halfway stage now. So we're going to talk about your shiny new object, which is quite jaw-dropping, really. And your shiny new object is a TV remote. So you have to explain why that is your shiny new object.
Yeah, because obviously it's not that new. This goes back to, I'm going to show my age now. So I started in automotive marketing in the days when the internet and digital marketing was still a relatively new world. And I can remember, so digital display was new, and suddenly we could measure how many people were clicking on an ad. And this was quite a seductive idea, which turned into, I had endless meetings with agencies who were telling me about how consumers would interact with marketing, and we were spending money building microsites that sat within the site wherever the ad was placed. So you remember those things where expandable banners where you click on them and they became ever more complex until eventually you built your entire damn website in a little window inside somebody else's website in order that a consumer could click on it. And then it was a Bob Hoffman quote, the guy whose books I like so much. And Bob Hoffman said, people have been interacting with advertising since the days of the TV remote, because when the ads came on, people clicked. And that sort of stopped me in my tracks, because it makes you realize that a lot of what we were doing was absolute nonsense. And again, in those early days, again, agencies coming in and telling me it's all about likes and consumers having a conversation with the brand. And then you can hear the Bob Hoffman voice saying, who the hell wants to have a conversation with the people that make their toothpaste? So I keep in the back of my mind this idea of the TV remote, because it is in this modern age of targeted marketing and the ability to measure everything, and everybody's got a marketing tech stack and everything links together, and we are getting obsessed with the numbers. And ironically, as an engineer, I'm starting to find myself going increasingly back to a very old-fashioned view of marketing and thinking, well, perhaps sometimes being untargeted is just as powerful as being targeted, even though I cannot in real time measure the effect on every single person to whom that ad has been exposed to. So yeah, I am finding myself challenging the notion of increasingly targeted marketing as the answer to everything.
So can you give us your most common rebuttal of targeted advertising? So when an agency comes in or a supplier and they said, well, we can measure this, we can track that, this we have the tech stack and it links through for everything from our CRM all the way through to our paid search terms or whatever it is, and what do you say to them? What does your no sound like?
Well, the best cheeky one-liner I've ever heard was, do you think Donald Trump would have been president if The Apprentice was a webinar? And what that's kind of hinting at, there's an idea, there's a US article written by a guy called Kevin Simler, and it's called something like, I can't remember the exact title of it, but it's called something like Ads Don't Work That Way. And it's a really interesting read. And it's his theory of why some advertising works the way that it does. And I guess I latched onto it particularly because I think it's very relevant to certain categories, of which automotive is probably one, definitely one in my opinion. And he is talking about why marketing works specifically because it isn't targeted. And he's got a bunch of example ads that he talks about, and there's one that's really interesting. It's a press ad, and it's for beer. But it made me think. So, for example, I don't know what kind of soap powder my next door neighbor uses, but I know what car they drive. And his beer example, I think it was a Corona ad, and it's a picture of two people sitting in chairs on a beach, and there's a bottle of beer, and there's a sunset or whatever. And he's saying basically that's not saying anything about the beer, about its taste, about its whatever. But he comes up with this theory of cultural imprinting, I think he calls it homus economicus or something. And basically what he's saying is, what's important to you is not necessarily that ad, but the fact that not only have you seen the ad, but because it's a print ad that goes everywhere, you know your friends have seen the ad. So if I'm going to go to my next door neighbor's barbecue and I'm going to take a beer with me, if I think of myself as a relaxed, easygoing, sitting on a beach, slightly hippie type guy, then I'll buy Corona, because I'll buy it knowing that my friends will have seen the ad, because it is a broadcast, non-targeted media. The media is part of the message itself. And so I arrive at the barbecue and they go, oh, there's a relaxed, hipster, beach-dwelling kind of guy, as opposed to if I bought, for example, this is in America, I bought Bud, for example, and then I'm a pickup truck driving good old boy or whatever. So the fact that the ad wasn't targeted is specifically what makes it work. Because if the product is saying something about you, and if as a rational human being, as Homo economicus, you have a self-interested desire in maximizing your utility, to use the economics phrase, you want to improve your standing in your peer group, then the signals that you give through the products that you're using are part of that jigsaw of how you maximize your own self-utility. And we understand that if we're sitting at home on a phone or a laptop and we're getting served targeted ads, if we're on social or on digital channels or whatever, we understand that those ads have been sent to us specifically to us individually and personally. And you see this thing based on your behavior. You look at something online and then 3 minutes later an ad pops up that's rated. So we know that those are targeted. So then you look at TV ads or cinema ads or press ads. We know that everybody else has seen the same thing that we have seen. So if you are talking about a product category, whether it be fashion or beer or cars or whatever, where your usage of the product is very visible to your peer group, friends, relatives, people at work, whatever, then you need to understand that they will decode the message that sends about you in the same way that you do, and that you have more confidence in that if you know that you have all seen the same thing. And the only way that works is if the marketing isn't targeted, and by definition, therefore, without that instant measurability, and maybe the TV remote is as relevant as the mouse or the smartphone screen click. And the example again I tend to use when people will talk about particular brands and who's the definite, who's brilliant at marketing. Apple crops up so often, but then you look at their media strategy, and so much of what they do is broadcast, massive outdoor, big TV campaigns, old school, not AI powered PPC or social. It's old fashioned media planning strategy with an ad that says something about the people that use it, is if you decode the ad in that way.
So this is a really interesting point. Thank you. So do you have any data on the view that in a advertising scenario, like a magazine like the Corona ad or like an Apple big billboard in central somewhere, that people do think, oh, all of my mates will have seen this ad, so therefore I need to show up with a Corona or show up with an iPhone? I mean, it makes sense, but I react quite badly to that as a consumer, but as a marketer I think it's fascinating. So I'm just curious to know, is there science out there that clarifies that? Is it known as something else? I'm just curious, as an engineer, what's your data point?
Well, so this is where it gets interesting, because I said early on I don't know how advertising works, and the answer, and genuinely I don't. So I have not found any data that absolutely drives you to a right and a wrong answer in this. I talked about Binet and Field, and some things they do, they talk about video is better for emotion, but what is emotion? And Kevin Simler's view of emotion is it's not emotion, it's cultural imprinting, and it's you maximizing your own self-utility. It's a rational behavioral economics thing as opposed to emotion. We just call it that. I once tried to ban the use of the word emotion in my marketing team. Whenever they use the phrase emotional, I would always say, what do you mean by emotional? Exactly what do you mean by emotional? And usually what you got was a lot of blank faces, and it was being used as a proxy for intangible, because I don't know quite what I mean. So I don't think, I haven't found any data that gets me to an absolute answer. But as an example, looking at what I've done in the past in terms of media planning, for example. So I've had periods where I've spent a big chunk of money on, let's say, digital display, and have struggled to find any lasting impact on brand metrics. And then I've spent the same amount of money on a broadcast medium, and I have been able to see a measurable and lasting impact on brand. So I think there is an argument where I tend to land in terms of trying to find a right answer with imperfect data, which is all as far as I know we ever have. What you need to do is almost break the task up into chunks and realize there is a long-term brand building job to do. And in my industry, in automotive, and I suspect in a lot of similar ones, if you want to become a big brand in the long term, potentially the best way to do that is through some significant quantity of untargeted marketing. And at the same time, you're going to have a finance director and a sales director kicking you under the table on an hourly basis, saying, what about the numbers? What about and in which case, you have to do the other stuff. You need to convert interest into leads and feed them through to the website and get people to book appointments or test drives or whatever your industry needs. So, and then there, of course, goes the phone. But the joys of lockdown, it's a wonderful thing. So you have to do all the digital targeted stuff as well. And the trick is to try and find the balance between the two. So Binet and Field say 60% brand building, 40% sales activation. My own experience suggests it's maybe slightly more weighted towards brand even than that, but I would love to analytically prove absolutely the right answer, and so far I have failed to do it. But if anybody out there listening has the answer and they would like to email it to me, please do.
Well, you've wrapped up the show yourself there. Unfortunately, we have to knock it on the head pretty soon. So if someone did have the answer to the perpetual conundrum and they did want to get in touch with you, how would you like them to do that?
I get daily contacts through LinkedIn, and that has become my, I guess, de facto source of unsolicited introductions. And I'll be completely honest, and I'm sure this is deeply frustrating to people. And my wife has spent some years doing the kind of marketing that involves cold calling agencies and so forth, and it's a hard, difficult road to travel, and you get knocked back a lot. And 90% of the approaches I get, I try when I have time to politely say no, thank you, but most of it is not immediately relevant. But sometimes something crops up, and I've had lasting business relationships with people that started out by one of those speculative, we've got this, you might be interested in it type connections on LinkedIn. So yeah, when I can, I respond as politely as I can. And I guess my advice for people who are trying to make those sorts of approaches is keep it brief and try and explain really quickly why this is something that might be of value, use, interest to whoever it is that you're contacting. And yeah, I wish everybody out there luck, because it's a difficult job to do. But equally, if you're getting 30 of them a day and you're trying to do your day job, you can't write long, well thought out responses to everybody either.
No, that's very fair. And I interviewed Iris Mayer, who is the CMO for Vodafone Business, and I asked her the same question, and she said, just at least make it funny, which has really stuck with me. You know, like, avoid, yeah. But once again, an even harder challenge. But David, thank you so much. That really got me thinking, that podcast. But thank you so much for your time.
It's my absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Hi, just before you go, I'd really appreciate it if you could take the time to write a review of the Shiny New Object podcast on Apple Podcasts or iTunes, whatever it's called these days, or whichever podcast provider you use. We're an indie podcast, so it would go a long way for us if you could just share the word and give us a bit of a support on those channels. That would just be fantastic. If you haven't got time, that's also cool. And yeah, if you could tell your colleagues about the podcast, and also, if possible, don't forget to subscribe. And I'd love to hear your feedback. If you'd like to speak on the podcast or be a guest, or you think I'm asking the wrong questions, anything, I'd be super interested to hear what you think. So please email me at tom@automatedcreative.net. That's TOM at, I'm not going to bother spelling it. Anyway, you'll work it out. Thanks so much.